When we hear the phrase ghost town, we usually picture tumbleweeds, wooden saloons, and dusty relics of the Old West, right? But the truth is actually a whole lot closer to home. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to trace the tragic four-act life cycle of America's modern ghost towns. We'll be diving into communities abandoned since 1970, towns that went from booming, highly ambitious utopias straight into toxic nightmares.
In 1978, a desperate resident of Love Canal, New York, displayed a chilling sign that read, "Give me liberty, I've already got death." Honestly, that hits hard. It asks a profound question that's going to guide our entire journey today. What happens when the very ground beneath your feet, the place you call home, becomes a literal mortal threat? Imagine if your own neighborhood suddenly turned against you.
Act 1. Dreams Built on Dust. Three totally different visions, sharing the exact same disastrous trajectory. Take Love Canal. Back in the late 1800s, William T. Love envisioned it as this magnificent model city, powered cheaply by a short canal between the upper and lower Niagara rivers. Then you've got Picher, Oklahoma. It sprang up practically overnight in 1913 as a booming mining hub, drawing thousands to the tri-state mining district. And then there's Bombay Beach, California, built up in 1929 as a glamorous private resort community on the shores of the Salton Sea, drawing weekend visitors to a desert oasis. Three distinct American dreams.
$20 billion. That is the staggering amount of lead and zinc ore produced by the Picher area alone between 1917 and 1947. To put that into perspective, over 50% of all the lead and zinc used during World War I was extracted right there. At its peak, over 14,000 miners worked those shafts. People absolutely flocked to Picher because it was the most productive lead-zinc mining field in the district. It was an economic powerhouse.
Act 2. Ticking toxic time bombs.
But as those boom times inevitably faded, the invisible consequences of all that massive industrial expansion started to bubble up. An EPA official named Eckert C. Beck put it perfectly and chillingly when he noted that these closed-down landfills stood like ticking time bombs. For decades, the toxic byproducts of America's industrial dreams were just swept under the rug, or, well, buried under the dirt. Think about the ground beneath your own home. These communities were living right on top of hazards they couldn't even see, just silently waiting to explode into public view.
82. That's the number of different chemical compounds discovered, rotting, and leaching straight into the backyards of Love Canal. Remember William T. Love's unfinished canal? Well, in the 1920s, it was turned into a chemical dump. The Hooker Chemical Company eventually threw some dirt over it and sold it to the city in 1953 for literally $1. Just a single dollar. And then a working-class neighborhood and the public school were built right on top of it. It wasn't until record rainfall hit in 1978 that these corroding waste drums actually broke through the soil. Puddles of noxious substances containing 11 suspected carcinogens flooded basements and school grounds. Trees turned black. Kids were coming home from playing outside with chemical burns.
And over in Times Beach, Missouri, things unraveled just as fast. It started with a simple, almost mundane attempt to control dust on dirt roads. In the early 70s, a waste hauler was hired to spray the roads with oil. But unbeknownst to the town, he was mixing that oil with dioxin, which is a highly toxic chemical compound. By 1971, animals were mysteriously dying. Kids were getting sick. The CDC finally linked it to the dioxin in 1974. But the fatal blow, that came in December 1982, when the Merrimack River severely flooded, washing that highly toxic mix everywhere and blanketing the entire town. Within months, the EPA had to announce a total federal buyout.
Heading back to Picher, Oklahoma, 34%. According to a 1994 Indian Health Service study, that represents the percentage of children in Picher suffering from lead poisoning. For decades, the town had been surrounded by these giant mountainous piles of toxic metal-contaminated mine tailings known locally as chat. The dust blew into the air, heavy metals leached right into the soil, and the kids paid the price with potential lifelong neurological problems. The town had fundamentally shifted from a home to a severe health hazard.
Act 3. The Human Exodus.
Once the invisible became undeniable, there was really only one option left: the forced displacement of thousands of families from the only homes they knew. In Love Canal, it was the physical sickness and the terrifying black sludge invading homes. In Times Beach, the EPA found dioxin levels 300 times what the CDC considered safe. In Picher, an Army Corps of Engineers study revealed that decades of unrestricted subsurface mining had left 86% of the town's buildings, including the school, at risk of suddenly collapsing into the earth. And in places like Thistle, Utah, natural disasters compounded by bad location wiped the town off the map entirely.
Imagine knowing a dump existed somewhere nearby, but having absolutely no idea those chemicals would literally seep through your foundation and invade your home. One Love Canal resident pleaded, "We are worried sick about the grandchildren and their children." And this encapsulates exactly why this matters. We aren't just looking at industrial history here. This was the complete shattering of safety for everyday families. Pregnant women and infants had to be evacuated first. Can you even imagine the psychological toll of leaving behind your home, constantly wondering what you've already been exposed to?
But amidst all this tragedy and mass exodus, you also see incredible human resilience. As the government bought out Picher, and even after a massive EF4 tornado destroyed 150 homes in 2008, some people simply refused to leave. Gary Linderman, the owner of the Old Miners Pharmacy, became known as Picher's last man standing. He anchored himself to his dying community out of pure dedication to his neighbors, promising to keep dispensing medication as long as a single person still needed him. And he stayed right up until he passed away in 2015.
Act 4, Green Parks, Toxic Graves.
Today, these poisoned landscapes present this incredibly dark, surreal irony. The absolute whiplash between the past and present is stunning. In 1983, Times Beach was highly toxic, entirely bought out by the feds, and completely incinerated. But today, that exact same land is Route 66 State Park. After an intense remediation effort, the EPA actually deleted it from the national priorities list. Now, it's a resilient 409-acre green space. You'll find fishermen catching bass, people hiking, cycling, and tourists visiting the old Bridgehead Inn, which is the only original building left standing.
But as idyllic and peaceful as that sounds, it holds a pretty haunting secret. To clean Times Beach, a temporary incinerator was brought in to burn over 37,000 tons of contaminated material. They burn the homes, they burn the businesses, they even burn the town water tower. And where did all those ashes go? They're buried right there in the park, beneath the grass, in a designated spot known simply as the Town Mound. It's a stark, heavy reminder that underneath those beautiful hiking trails and boat launches lies the literal incinerated grave of a once thriving American community.
And the thing is, Times Beach wasn't just some isolated incident. The American landscape is dotted with the remnants of industrial hubris. Centralia, Pennsylvania has been burning from an underground mine fire since 1962. Gilman, Colorado, was abandoned to toxic mining contamination and became a Superfund site. Bombay Beach fell victim to flooding and the rising toxicity of the Salton Sea. Every single one of these represents a place where the relentless pursuit of economic growth eventually rendered the land utterly hostile to human life. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative question. When a town's lifeblood becomes its poison, what is truly left behind? We build our communities on the promise of industry, but as these modern ghost towns show us, the line between a booming utopia and an environmental tragedy is incredibly fragile. Whether it's an empty street, an incinerated mound hidden under a state park, or one dedicated pharmacist refusing to turn out the lights, these towns teach us a profound lesson about the true long-term costs of our ambitions. Keep that in mind the next time you drive through a small town or take a hike through a pristine state park.